And now, October 24 today marks United Nations Day, a moment to reflect on the founding of the UN in 1945 and its mission to promote peace, human rights, and development across the globe with the mission to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. This year's celebration highlights the importance of global cooperation and sustainable development, especially as nations tackle challenges like conflict, climate change, and inequality. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres reaffirmed the organization's commitment to multilateralism, urging countries to work together for a world built on peace and shared prosperity across the world. The nations are hosting symbolic events from peace marches to flag-raising ceremonies, reminding citizens that global progress begins with collective action. Well, for more on the day, the United Nations Day, I'm being joined live in the studio by the former Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Dr. Mohammed. Thanks for joining us live on Arise News on Daybreak.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw.
Now it's the United Nations Day, and it sends strong resonance of how the League of Nations failed and the world powers after the attack on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the fall of Nazi Germany, that 50 representatives gathered in San Francisco to sign that draft for United Nations, which eventually took off. In 1945, we saw world leaders like President Roosevelt of United States, Winston Churchill of United Kingdom. We saw General de Gaulle of France, and the top 5 superpowers coming together to ensure that, to promote world peace and security. Now it's 70 years after. Would you say the United Nations, how far would you say United Nations have fared in this tall mandate?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Shaw. Good morning, our viewers. I think it's 80 years, right? Not 70 years.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. 80 years.
And if you look at the express aim, objective of the United Nations Security Council, United Nations generally, to prevent successive generations of the world from the scourge of war. By human nature, conflict is inevitable. But at the scale we have seen in the First World War and Second World War, you will say the United Nations is a resounding success in the sense that we haven't had a world war that involves various countries involved in a conflict across the globe. So in that sense, 80 years on, that is a success. But whether the United Nations has been able to stop wars completely, on that metric, we'll say is still a work in progress.
Okay, let's get this clear, because this is a very disturbing trend now. After the Second World War, there came the United Nations, and now the world became polarized. You remember the Cold War era between the United States and the Soviet Union. And then analysts said that perchance there is an emergence of war between these superpowers that survivors would envy the dead. So the pattern of world war changed, and we saw countries using proxies to strike each other. Remember the popular Cuban Missile crisis when they discovered that Soviet naval base there. So would it not be misleading to say that there have been no multiple wars when a lot of countries, look at what's happening in Gaza, wouldn't it be misleading to think that it's just between Israel and Gaza when there are so many interests, multinational interests attached to that regional conflict?
Well, even beyond Gaza, even the conflict in Africa is multifaceted. You have state actors, you have non-state actors, you have external factors. You have issues like climate and migration. So, but I think my thesis statement this morning is that in the context of the superpowers locking horns and bombing each other directly in the form of the world wars we have seen, the United Nations have succeeded in stopping that directly. Yes, conflicts, ongoing, a lot of conflicts, involvement of the superpowers themselves, yes, but as you said, through proxies. So I will repeat, we have not been able to completely eliminate conflicts and wars, but at least we have avoided head-on collision between the most armed countries, dangerously armed countries in the world. And that, you will say, is either kudos to the United Nations or the mutually assured destruction level they have reached. Either way, the United Nations remained the theater, I would say, where all these countries meet and, to a large extent, resolve most problems that could have led to such direct conflagrations. So I will still hold my view. I think, yes, it has achieved avoiding war on a scale of the World War I and II, but conflicts ongoing is a serious work in progress.
Yeah, so when we look at within the context of the threat to world peace and security, some experts are saying that it's high time political leaders shifted politics away from governance, that there are some other threats to world peace apart from wars, like climate change. When you look at from the Paris Agreement, the climate change conference so far, where you see the politicization of national interest in addressing this climate change threat to the world. Would you say the United Nations have been able to drive an impactful policy in addressing some of these more fundamental threats to the world peace and security?
Yeah, so now you have expanded the concept of world security.
The dynamics is changing.
Yeah, the concept of world security beyond bombs and bullets, and that's a fact. We have the climate issue, we have poverty, and of course we have diseases. And I will say this is one area beyond physical wars that I would say the United Nations have done tremendously well within the last 80 years. If you take issues of diseases, how the United Nations led initiatives to fight polio, eliminate what do you call it, this disease that was eliminated completely, you know, and then the fight on HIV/AIDS, you know, TB and malaria. And then, of course, you mentioned climate change, you know, issues around climate change, where the United Nations became the pivot, actually the central point of coordinating discussions, you know, and evolution of knowledge and strategies, how to combat climate change.
I think you're giving the United Nations free points here. I think you've chosen that controversial line because you would have some skeptics to contend with. When you look at the structure of the United Nations and the recent dynamics, the United States, that have been the chief funder of this global body, withdrawing some of its support, some of its funding aid from this body. Look at what's happening in the World Food Program now. Even the Northeast is a victim to this policy. Would you say that the United Nations has that political will, the mandate and the resources to make a difference in this recently changing world that we are?
So beyond the charters and the protocols of the United Nations and its institutions are the state parties, right? And of course, now you just spoke about funding and how one of the major funders, the United States, is, let us say, is reluctant to continue playing that role. So these are the challenges we're discussing. The United Nations as a body, and then the challenges it is facing in delivering its own mandates. And of course, even in the areas of the conflicts, you know, you have the conflicts are evolving. We used to have conflicts between states. Now the conflicts are mostly, you know, within states, especially in the African continent, involving a variety of actors, you know, some of them very committed, violent groups, well armed and organized, you know, and the issue of this political consensus in the United Nations. You mentioned the United States pulling out funding, political polarization going on, you know, and then the partnerships between the United Nations itself, the continental bodies and sub-regional organizations and other world agencies. And of course, the capacity. The United Nations depends on the world community to execute those mandates. So where there are political polarizations or outright lack of political will, especially from the major global players, the United Nations will just have no option but to tarry along. So yes, it has existed for 80 years. The mandates are clear. You know, it has delivered on some. It has shown clear direction on others. But is seriously challenged.
Okay, how would you describe those who feel that United Nations is just an assembly of World War II, victors of World War II? When you look at the structure of the United Nations, the use of the deployment of veto by these five superpowers,
Yes.
US, UK, France, China, and Russia. When you also look at the flagrant disregard for UN resolutions, now, as in the case of Gaza, now, you could see that those resolutions are not being respected by the parties involved in this conflict.
Yeah, that's obvious. The United Nations is a post-war party conference by the winners, by the victors of First World War. And we have discussed this here some other times, that victory, that military force that gave that victory is actually now symbolized and represented in the United Nations Security Council. And then you have economic power backing it. So yes, as per ideals of democracy, of equality of all countries, equality of sovereignty, we will say we are far away from that. But the mandate and clear attempts to achieve those mandates, the United Nations is committed. Challenges, yes, there are serious challenges, and you just mentioned one, lack of democratic process within the system, political polarization even within the Security Council, sustaining conflicts across the globe. But as we started, I would say we have not seen the scale of conflicts we have witnessed before the United Nations formation in 1945.
Okay, now let's look at Nigeria's aspiration to make its voice louder, clearer, and stronger within the Committee of Nations and also within the international arena. That has been undermined with the inability of the United Nations to accept a representation from Africa into the 5-member seats of the Security Council. And it ridicules that it creates a mockery on the UN stands for democracy, equality, and also some fundamental human rights. So long. I remember when you led the delegation, I think sometimes in 2013, at the African Union, when you won the debate for Nigeria to represent Africa at the permanent membership of the Security Council. But I think getting to that highest decision-making body in the UN, that did not see the light of day. So what do you make of Nigeria's inability to represent Africa at that seat, that permanent seat of the Security Council?
So first, it's not about Nigeria, it's about Africa not represented. And then if Africa eventually gets represented,
yes, but as the most populous black nation, with our intervention in conflict region in Africa, don't you think that Nigeria should be prioritized in terms of representation at the permanent seat of the Security Council?
That's certainly, Nigeria has a compelling case to be considered for a permanent seat in the Security Council if that were ever offered to Africa, partly because of what you just said, our track record in peacekeeping, which is almost legendary. Since our independence in 1960 up to the 90s and early 2000s was the Sudan intervention, Sudan 1 and 2, Abuja 1 and 2 rather, and then the ECOMOG intervention in West Africa. And of course, even recently in 2010, 14, 15, Nigeria had intervened and mobilized troops in Mali and Guinea-Bissau. So that's an impeccable record. One will say Nigeria's aspiration is even moral if you look at it this way. But unfortunately, the Security Council has not shown the willingness, unfortunately, to open up and democratize. And this brings us back to the history of its formation, you just said. It's a club of the victors, especially the Security Council, the P5, and then now being backed with a serious economic power. So Nigeria needs to reassess its aspirations, its to reflect deeply on its military capabilities and economic position within the continent and beyond, and see where we need to go and start working. It's obvious that power is not given.
Yeah, like the popular saying, power is not served a la carte. But
essentially
when you look at
taken.
Nigeria's aspiration in expanding its interest beyond its international frontiers, how would you assess Nigeria's engagement with the United Nations?
The United Nations, Nigeria and United Nations have engaged extensively over the decades of its existence.
I'm talking of national interest.
Well, so national interest is an omnibus, you know, and United Nations partners with continental organizations, regional bodies, and agencies and countries to pursue global objectives. And within such global objectives, you know, various countries pursue their specific national interests. At some point, at the point of independence, Nigeria's national aspirations then were total decolonization of the African continent, you know, total dismantling of apartheid infrastructures all over the continent, and human rights. And for a few decades after our independence, Nigeria had pursued that successfully. In fact, at some point, Nigeria was a permanent chair of the United Nations Human Rights Organization. So it has been a very long journey, 80 years. Within these 80 years, there were rough patches. I would say a lot of them. But essentially, Nigeria had mounted the international stage, I would say, in its previous decades, with tremendous successes. Have we maintained those successes lately? I will unfortunately say no. And it's for the obvious reasons we started enumerating. Issues of our military capability is unfortunately dwindling. We're getting dwarfed, you know, even in our immediate area of influence.
Okay, can we just quickly take a look at Nigeria's quest in ending insurgency and its intervention in the Sahel region now? Within the context of the international arena, now, what do you make of this effort, and do you think we are getting enough support from the UN?
So, as I said, UN, the way UN addresses conflicts is one, through mediations. If mediations fail, you talk of sanctions. If sanctions fail, sometimes there's direct military intervention. And then, of course, through partnerships, I will emphasize that, with regional organizations like the ECOWAS or the continental bodies like African Union, or directly with member states. So, the insurgency in Nigeria, and by extension, the instability in the Sahel belt, is driven by so many factors. You know, religious extremism, ideological, violent religious extremism, climate change issues, fragility of states within the Sahel, you know. And this has more or less pushed the Sahel neighborhood into a dysfunctional neighborhood. It's almost becoming dysfunctional. Now there are two competing organizations within what used to be ECOWAS, exclusive ECOWAS bloc. You have the Committee of Sahel States, I think, and then you have ECOWAS, you have the coup bloc, and then you have external actors coming in, you know. Talks of Russia on one hand, you know, and European Union having different interests. So I would say Nigeria's standing within the sub-region, even within the Sahel, you know, is getting weakened, with Nigeria covering her backs because of attacks within Nigerian state, deploying troops within Nigeria rather than outside.
Yeah. Within our time, the recent days have been inundated with perception from the international community, especially from the U.S. Congress, designating Nigeria as a CPC, country of particular concern. What's your take on this?
So now this is outside the United Nations.
Outside, but it has international
exactly.
impact.
So now you can see the political polarization we're talking about. You know, mechanisms that should have been entirely global mechanisms being appropriated by superpowers. And each country has its own national interests, whether it is a member of the United Nations Security Council or not. And the essence of the Security Council, the ethic of the United Nations in general, is to harmonize global positions and create standards. So if countries, individual countries, rely more on their mechanisms to achieve, to arrive at decisions and conclude on actions, that's when the polarization of the world will continue. So I have concerns with a sovereign country sitting down and using only its own internal mechanisms and arriving conclusions.
Paradoxically, they said that most of the fact they got came from Nigerians.
Yes, no, I'm not.
That was what informed that decision in designating Nigeria as a country of particular concern. But the federal government, through the Minister of Information, said that that we need to be wary of some foreign actors that are deliberately plotting to weaken the unity of the country. Did you share that sentiment?
No, I'm not taking it as I'm not taking it directly as a plot straight away, but I'm just urging caution, between even Nigeria and the United States itself, to look more closely at the facts and study the nuances of the conflict, just as the United Nations would have done if it were done charged with these responsibilities. It has special committees, it has special rapporteurs that will diligently look at the facts and avoid these political brickbats at the end when pronouncements are made. So I urge cautions on both sides for Nigeria to be truthful and most importantly, eliminate her own vulnerabilities. I think it's the vulnerabilities that are creating all this. Our inability to stamp down and take ownership of our territorial integrity. That's where the problem started.
Okay, now let's look at Nigeria's diplomatic shuttle and its foreign engagements in the international arena. Right now, we don't have ambassadors leading our missions abroad. I remember your time within 2011 and 2015. That you with late Ambassador Ashiru, that was regarded as one of the golden era of Nigeria's diplomatic shuttle and foreign engagement. Then I remember you came up with very robust trade policy and diplomatic policy for the country then. But now, and you had missions abroad being led by, spearheaded by mostly career diplomats then. What's the implication of not having ambassadors in our foreign missions right now? So
not having representation is different from not having ambassadors. So we have representations, but we don't have ambassadors. And in the diplomatic practice, that affects your visibility and access at the highest level. And some countries feel uncomfortable that you have not taken your relationships serious enough to have a representation at the level of ambassador. That's what they call chargé. That's like someone overseeing the affairs of. And chargés, by convention, they have serious limitations on the access they will have.
Chargé d'affaires.
Chargé d'affaires. So it's quite unfortunate that Nigeria is running without ambassadors for this elongated time period, perhaps the longest in its history.
Sorry, if I may ask now, because we've debated this extensively and very intensively here, the not having ambassador and now Nigeria being designated a CPC, what does it have severe consequence?
It's not consequences. It could be related with lack of representation at the ambassadorial level. As I just said, there is a certain level of access and visibility and even representation that a chargé cannot have, that an ambassador will ordinarily have. So the dynamics of lobbying and access and presenting your case as a country to your host country that, look, this information you have is not correct. So you need an ambassador to drive that process. You appoint an ambassador to fly your flag and be given that access, by international laws. If you come short and you have charges, there are certainly accesses you'll not have.
Okay, before we wrap up now, there is this narrative that have defined the ever-changing international arena. Some people believe that political realities are power realities, and that is what is defining what we see in the international arena. To what extent will you agree with that?
Certainly. That's how we started this morning. That the United Nations itself is a tea party of the victors of the Second World War. And that formed the engine room, the United Nations Security Council, which essentially is a hegemon within the United Nations system.
Okay.
And that has resulted in the polarization of...
My producer is about to sanction me because of time, the time factor. So thank you very much for making our time to join us live on this very engaging discussion. I wish to have you more so that you can throw some light on this aspect of the nation's polity and the international environment that looks so esoteric.
Thank
you very much,
Dr.
Node Mohammed, for joining us. He is the former Minister of State for Foreign Affairs under the President Goodluck Jonathan era. And that's all we have time for here on Daybreak. It's goodbye from me, Benga Ashiru. And remember, it's Friday. Have a lovely weekend round of applause.